is brought to you by ZN, the OG digital agency in Brussels.
And live from ZN, from Brussels and Sevilla, it's ZN Live. I'm very excited to be here today. I am Phil Weiss, CEO founder, and my co-host today is Jesus, a resident artist and COO extraordinaire. And our guest today is Marco Ricorda. We've known Mark for quite a long time. He's actually an experienced communicator working across different institutions from the Parliament to the Commission. And he is one of the first social media analysts working for the Commission. So he has some very interesting insights from what people were thinking about those tools at the very early start. So Marco, I want to go straight into the tools that you're using today, because you are an EU influencer. You're somebody who's been using channels a lot to communicate on different topics. I see that you're quite active on LinkedIn and you're still communicating on X. So how was it then, and how is it today?
Oh, Phil, it's been quite some time. So, I mean, just to clarify, today I'll be speaking in a personal capacity. It's been very different, you know. Back in, let's say, 15 years ago, or and even a bit before, most of the management of large organizations could not understand what was going on. There was still the idea that TV and mainstream media, printed media, hardly would be replaced by what we have today. So the landscape is constantly changing. And in fact, I like to encourage people in our field to talk about not only communication, but communication operations. So to make sure that the analytical part, the looking at trends with contextual and real data is part of our work. Based on LinkedIn, as you said, today, in my opinion, for the work we do, so trying to create impact and influence policy or inform stakeholders and policymakers, LinkedIn is offering terrific return on investment. And I can see some parallels to what Facebook used to be between 2010 and 2017. Why do I say that? Because the two platforms offer a great variety of content that you can publish. You can be live, you can have long form, short form content. On LinkedIn, actually, you can even upload PDFs that give you a really great reach compared to simple links. So you have a toolbox at your disposal based on the type of content that you want to publish. Therefore, today, I find it the most fun, but also the most effective platform for the type of content I usually publish. I don't think X is over. I think that X has evolved. I still find it extremely useful as a fast information getting platform. But in terms of fun, LinkedIn is giving me a bit more pleasure.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. We've had discussions. Actually, we had a workshop in our office a few days ago, and that was one of the big questions, you know, LinkedIn or X, because a lot of people in Brussels kind of think like X is over, there's too much uncertainty. And, you know, LinkedIn feels much more comfortable because of it's a networking thing. People are, you know who they are. But when we did a study, we found that actually there's still a lot of content on X. There's still journalists, policymakers who are there. And LinkedIn, I think, is great for certain things, but different things. And so I'm just wondering, and I feel that the difficulty is, I think you kind of need to do a bit of both. And then, you know, my follow-up question will be, what about the other channels? You know, the threads, the Blue Sky, the Mastodon, because I think everybody's pretty confused about, you know, how do you focus on in this very complicated territory?
It's exactly as you said. There are still some great groups and lists, especially I would totally recommend the ZN influencers list that is updated every year. That is fantastic to get information fast, I repeat. However, what we can see on Twitter, what happened throughout the years, is that less and less people, less and less accounts were creating a higher and higher percentage of all the content published daily. So that's what we have today. We have macro influencers on Twitter that get a lot of traction, and it's really hard to penetrate that particular sphere unless you have built a strong following before, most of the time. With regards to other upcoming platforms that you mentioned, Jack Dorsey's Blue Sky, Mastodon, or the new, basically the side feature of Instagram, which is Thread. In terms of policy, I still haven't seen them breaking through. I've seen some people on Mastodon creating fast, big communities, but in my experience, it's really hard to create your own niche and get the traction you would get more easily on LinkedIn. So what I'm saying is that there seemed to have been initially a great period for Mastodon, especially for one community on EU policy issues, but that fast faded away, and that happened with uncountable platforms in the past 15 years. So there is, let's say, some fashion to use a specific platform, but then if you don't really hook the user and you don't really hook a user community there, they just start fading away. What happens usually, they get bought by larger companies, or their features get basically they become part of a larger platforms. I give you an example. You remember Vine back in the day?
Yeah.
So Vine gathered this community of influencers that, especially in America, is still quite active on mostly TikTok and Instagram today. But Vine became the first video sharing platform of Twitter. Twitter bought Vine and started sharing videos through the technology that Vine offered. So my recommendation is always to look at the market, look at companies that are expanding, because most of the time they have the capacity to acquire these smaller startups or companies and incorporate their features into their own platforms.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. The difficulty is that the upcoming platforms haven't really broken through. I think we actually, and we're going to do a more in-depth analysis over the coming months, but it really looks like it's still X, with LinkedIn attracting more, I would say, engagement from very small groups on different topics. So it's a kind of different architecture. What I was thinking about when I saw Threads and Mastodon was that if they can make the Fediverse work, and that you can really post in one place and then it can be reposted and shared and all that, that might be something. And in theory, it's happening, but I don't really see it creating traction. Do you think there's a model there that might change the architecture? Because that was the promise of the Fediverse. Like, okay, it's gonna be a portable thing. Do you think that's, just basically it's difficult to do and it's not happening because there's too much inherent resistance in those big networks that own the traffic? Or do you think there's a possibility of things changing in the coming 6 months or year?
I don't have a crystal ball about that, but what I can tell you is that it all depends on the content market. So if I go on LinkedIn, I expect, and most users expect, to get professional content written in a safe format. And contrary to Twitter, that it has become, over the past few years, a sort of coliseum where you go there not only to get information, but also to see people fighting over arguments of different natures. In regards to our specific field, we look at policy and what people think about different policy decisions. So it has become like an entertaining coliseum for policy. That is a definition that I've seen recently, which I find quite fitting. LinkedIn is safer. You can literally ask for opinions without being bashed. You can create a solid conversation as if you work in a safe and calmer environment. And the point is that, what do customers, let's think of users as customers. What do they expect? What kind of content, what kind of register, what kind of format do they expect when they enter a platform, when they turn on their phone and basically put a scroll on an app? If you manage to, so the point is that the content creation needs to fit the expectation of the customers. In my opinion, what happened to Threads is that you don't get policy content. You don't go on Thread. Most users would not go on Threads for policy content. That's what you would expect on Mastodon, but it's still kind of complicated for a user to get to the right group. So that's, let's say, something that discourages users to grow. And with regards to Blue Sky, personally, I still haven't got what is its unique selling point, but we'll see over the next few months what happens.
Yeah, I think they're essentially Twitter clones. I mean, it's basically the same architecture. I think trying different ways of doing it, but in essence, it's not really a different kind of architecture. And I think the more people are uncertain about X, the more they experiment with the other ones. But then they say, well, I can't, and sometimes they dramatically abandon by posting on LinkedIn, I quit X. And it's like, well, so what? I mean, just good luck with that. But I mean, the point is, look, to me, as you rightly said, it's a question of audience and what kind of content they want to consume. And then, of course, there's the whole, the nature of what content is being promoted by the platforms. I think Threads is being tried not to push content of a certain nature as a deliberate policy. I actually think, I feel that in the US, there is quite a big audience of journalists who have really fully committed to Threads. I don't see the same in Europe, or at least in the bubble. But I want to come to the question of where people get information, especially news, from. There was a study recently by Reuters talking about the great platform reset, where actually I think they were starting by examples with Facebook and some other platforms, saying, look, people used to get their news from a lot of these social platforms, and I think X is still one of the top platforms for getting news. But some of the platforms have started to kind of discourage that. And on the other side, you have new tools, interfaces to that information through AI tools. So do you think that the way we consume news is shifting? You've posted about that a few times. Do you see a platform reset, or do you think it's a minor trend?
Well, that's super interesting. I don't have specific insights on the type of content that is pushed by platforms. What we can see, though, is that age groups are more and more relevant. So while there are platforms that can span across different age groups, there is a strong differentiation where certain age groups, let's say people from the age of adolescence to 18, then 18 to 24, 24 to 35, and so on, where they basically spend most of their time. Now, getting news is one thing. Spending screen time is also another thing. So we have to differentiate that. What I see is that there is less hunger for news, and that's something we can reflect on, and more hunger for entertainment. And I think this is quite worrying. We are not getting news anymore to being bored. So we are constantly looking at our phone just because it is uncomfortable to just do nothing and be there in the moment. I think in terms of mental health, especially exacerbated by the global lockdowns that we experienced a few years ago, that is a trend that hasn't gone away. So screen time overall globally is worryingly increasing. With regards, and we shouldn't confuse spending screen time with news. With regards to news, TV is still extremely relevant. TV is still extremely relevant. And in my opinion, Twitter is very relevant as long as you have a very tailored list. You know that now in this platform, you can get recommendations from the platform. So the algorithms basically tailor it for you, or you can choose just what you're following. That is a major update from these platforms. If you're interested in being up to date with the news, which is a recommendation I would give to people working in communication in our field, in policy and institutions, I would stick to those who you're following, because the proposal of content is more authentic, and it would make you less vulnerable to algorithm proposals that companies may want to push onto your accounts.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And this idea of trying to be much more deliberate about where you get your information from, I think it's actually an effort that I feel we all want to do. It's sometimes quite difficult because there's friction, like you have to stop and think, let's select the people or the accounts that I want to follow, and then let's kind of organize my news diet. There's been a lot of discussion about the impact of social media on mental health. There's the Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, which is really a big debate about how much teens are being impacted by these platforms. And you said you made a very good point. I'm a big fan of mindfulness and meditation as a practice. I think it's something that hopefully teenagers can at least see that as a counterbalance to this. Ironically, a lot of the mindfulness space is on social media. So you have all these social media channels and apps saying, hey, you can be more mindful by doing that. And you think like, wait a minute, aren't you coming to me with the same platforms? But no, I'm just wondering, for younger people actually who think, and this is the interesting thing, a lot of them themselves say we are spending too much time online. If you ask them, they don't like it, but they do it. So how do you tell people, okay, if you feel uncomfortable with the amount of time you're spending online, how do you break that cycle without, leaving the society and going to live in a mountain?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, at the Joint Research Center, we ran a number of sessions with high school students to experiment with them what was their acknowledgement and awareness of how much time they were spending on screen and how much they were actually getting hooked into a sort of rabbit hole where you just don't realize anymore where you are, but you're simply scrolling purposelessly. And what I wanted to say is that this is hardly a young people issue. This spans across all age groups. The difference is that younger people are born with it. So there is a different understanding of what it means to be in the moment with regards to between people, generations that have born digitally. Well, not only digitally, but smartphone digitally, and those who haven't. You can see a different awareness of what that means. But trust me, cell phone addiction or scrolling addiction is far from being just a young people issue. Basically, with regards to being detached from phones, I'm not sure I would be the biggest advocate. But last year, I wrote a blog talking about ending motivational content that tells you what not to do on platforms that actually you shouldn't follow. So exactly on your point. It's more of a topic for a psychologist, for a behavioral scientist. But I would start by using exactly the tools that the European legislation gives us, which is the fact that we can choose freely the content that we can follow without having algorithms just push us into a rabbit hole. The Digital Services Act provides this toolbox, and I think it'd be great if we could raise more awareness about what is available out there.
Marco, I would like to jump here because I know that you are in Sevilla, so I'm dying of envy here. By the way, is the weather okay now, or is it too warm? Or
yes, it's not that hot yet.
Okay. Unfortunately, in some weeks I will be there, but for the moment it's like you lucky being there in Sevilla. As you know, I'm from there. My question is about Europe in general, because it's not something new. There are plenty of agencies that have been distributed around Europe, but in Sevilla is the case, and at least in my context, I know that there are people that were commenting me, oh, this is great. Now we have a better vision of Europe is nearer. You see, it's happening here. Do you have that experience? Have you seen that actually the fact that there are agencies that are distributed around Europe is bringing Europe to the citizens, maybe cities that are a bit far from the Brussels bubble?
That's a very interesting point. In the case of Sevilla, I can certainly say yes. The European Commission, so the actual commission, not an agency, has a presence here for over 30 years, and today we account over 350 people at the GRC Sevilla site. Apart from that, apart from the actual presence, of course, there is a significant amount of local outreach that changes and definitely improves the perception of locals about what Europe is doing for them. It's certainly the case, for instance, where in other circumstances where the European Commission or agencies have a large amount of staff and perform local outreach, like in the village of Ispra in the north of Italy, where the JRC is hosting some 1,500 people. Yes, it makes a difference. There is a strategy for local outreach. And in my opinion, what I care about the most since for the past 10 years, I would say, is try to reach those people that are called people somewheres. When we look at European communication, there is a famous, actually, MEP and philosopher, François-Xavier Bellamy, who identified between citizens anywhere, so citizens that basically live in large urban centers and they care about similar issues, whether they are in the center of Paris, Brussels, Berlin, or Milan, but they're very distant from people living in the periphery of these cities. I think the biggest challenge for all organizations acting in Europe, especially when it comes to acknowledging the democratic process of Europe, is not to reach those citizens, but to reach citizens that are strongly eradicated in territories that yet do not know the overall benefits of being together in a union. The agencies, as you said, Jesus, work very well. But today, in a digital world we can do much more with digital means and not only physical means.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, and it's a challenge. I think the entire political world, globalization, is being challenged around this conversation, which is, it seems to belong to a global elite that's not connecting to the people on the ground. And so the question is, how do you build those conversations and bring people in to see why these initiatives are taking place? And for people who want to join maybe the nowheres or the somewheres, but do something for communication, either European level or local level, what is your advice when you meet young people who tell you, I want to be in communication? What's your kind of tip, and what do you tell them to do?
I mean, I don't have the audacity to tell young, talented people how they should act. The trend, though, has been extreme specialization. So it's very hard to find yourself in a market if you have a very generic profile. I think right now you have to find a niche, so you have to try to meet the demand. Let's say if you were working in a specific type of communication before and you see the evolution of it, you have to follow the market. So as I said earlier in this conversation, I would encourage anyone, not only younger communicators, to think of communication operations. How can you structure communication in a way that follows the demand for it? So I encourage people to undertake an economic approach, because I think of information and content as an asset. And this asset can be provided, but there is a demand for it. So try to understand, so follow the money type of approach. Try to see where this value is most requested and focus on that specific niche. I see a stronger and stronger specialization that is required. And God knows what we're going to be seeing in the next few months or years. Maybe all the people that were working on generically digital communications will have to be podcast producers or shorts producers or TikTok producers, because the specialization of the format requires such an expertise that cannot be improvised anymore.
Excellent. So I think you're saying, go deep into specific areas. There's a debate between the generalists and the specialists. So interesting to hear your views on the topic. Now it's time for our recommendations. So Marco, what are your recommendations for our viewers today?
There is a book that I wish I'd read sooner. And this book is called, I don't know if you can see it, The Status Game.
Yeah.
So basically, it's Will Storr that identifies how status has become, or maybe always was, the biggest currency that most people are looking for. Sometimes we consume that with visibility, with money, with power. It all gets summed up in status. And funny enough, you remember when on Facebook we used to post status updates. Well, I think this book gives you a bit more insights on what it means to have status and how we can communicate it and produce it. Total banger.
Excellent. I actually read his selfie book, which is a fascinating discussion about the culture of kind of narcissism. Did you have a second recommendation, or I'll move to Jesus? I think so. Jesus, sorry, you have a second one?
In terms of accounts, I must admit that our friend Gary V is still the most useful person to follow, simply because sometimes he shares hard truths about our business, but they're never confuted. He always gets it right. And when he doesn't, he admits it. So in my opinion, the way also he communicates, so it's fairly accessible, is still the most relevant communication-related, marketing-related account or set of accounts that you can follow for people working in our profession.
Yeah, actually, we embrace the Gary V content pyramid model, which is, take a big piece of content and cut it into lots of small pieces. We've been doing that more and more systematically. So we have an event, and in that one event, we create content that can be used for weeks or months, in video form, in article form, in messages. And I mean, that's one approach, but I think you're right. Gary is very interesting, and at least he's experimenting live right in front of us. So, Jesus, what are your recommendations for this week?
So today I come with a documentary. I must say that it's a documentary that since I watched it some days ago is still in the back of my mind. Is something that I believe is changing your perception about many things. It's called Beyond Utopia. It's a story, it's a documentary about people that are trying to escape from North Korea. And actually it's very authentic because there is no fake shoots. Everything is totally real happening at the moment that is shot. It's extremely impactful. It's directed by Madeleine Gavin, who was actually making some research on the dark web before creating that, where she was astonished of what she could see there, and then trying to connect with the people that are permitting some people to escape from there. And the most exciting thing is the moment that people get out of there and then suddenly they confront to a reality, a world that they have no clue that were like this. So that's really astonishing. So voila, that's my recommendation for today.
Excellent. So my recommendation, which is actually a kind of old book, it's the 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. Yuval Noah Harari. He's been a lot, very present around a whole range of topics. This is actually kind of before a lot of the topics he's talking about today. Very interesting insights about where we're going, talking already about AI before the hype. So that gives him a lot of credit. So very interesting if you want to step back and think about the key trends that might be shaping our future. And my second recommendation is to bookmark EU Influencer 2024, which is on the 20th of September, hosted at the Cado Hotel. It's going to be great. So we look forward to seeing you there or online. So that's all we have time for on a sunny week in Brussels. The weather is going to cool down. I think it's maybe going to approximate Sevilla temperatures. Who knows? Great to hear from you, Marco. We will continue our conversation online. Have a fantastic weekend. See you later. Bye.
Thank you. You too. Take care.
Bye-bye.